Hello, I'm Alistair Magowan, and I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you by means of this recording. I retired just over a year ago, and before that, I was Bishop of Ludlow, and having been there for 11 years. And as such, I got to know both Barbara Bell and Tim Coles really quite well, as both lived in Ludlow. And I'm very grateful to them, and particularly for Tim, for this opportunity to be able to come and address you. So sorry that we couldn't meet in Manchester this year, but I trust that by this means we'll be able to make some links. The reason, of course, for that gathering was to celebrate 50 years of the Association of Christian Teachers. Or to put it into sort of Bible language, and even sometimes language we use around our royal family, it would be a year of Jubilee. As we know, education is a very fast and moving world of change. And indeed, much has changed over 50 years and even before that. Some of the key things, I think, over the 20th century, the Butler Act of 1944, the Baker Acts in the 1980s, Labour's beginning with academisation, further change and reform of all of that under Michael Gove, and so we could go on. I guess that you, far more than me, can document through some of those changes the places where there's been genuine progress and improvement, but also the places where there's been challenge and perhaps sadly where things have not gone in that direction and are perhaps even worse. Now, I'm not a teacher. However, somewhat to my surprise, I was asked a number of years before, when I was Vicar of Egham in Guildford Diocese, that was in 1989, to join the Diocesan Board of Education. It was a whole new world to me, but one which I began to relish. In the end, I became the first vicar in that diocese to ever chair the Diocesan Board of Education. When I then moved on to be Archdeacon of Dorset, I chaired the Diocesan Board of Education in Salisbury Diocese for nearly 9 years. And my experience, therefore, I say, has been the narrower one of church schools and Church of England schools, but I'm very conscious that Christian teachers are not simply there in church schools, they're in state schools and in private sector schools. In fact, wherever there's education, we thank God that there are still Christian teachers in each and every place. I have to say, from the experience that I did gain, I came to understand something of the complexities around education. Not only in terms of delivering curricula, but also the financial challenges, the legal challenges, the resourcing challenges. And I came to appreciate as never before the importance of education and just what an incredible gift it is. Indeed, I would go so far as to say I think it's one of the most precious gifts that one person can give to another. Of course, this is only possible because of the dedication and the skill of people like you. So here we are on this Jubilee, 50 years of the Association of Christian Teachers. And so I want to use these moments to talk something about the Bible's wisdom in relation to marking 50 years and how it might relate to the world of education and to you as Christian teachers. I've set two texts, one from the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verses 1 to 4, and then 8 to 10, and then one from Luke's Gospel, chapter 4, verses 14 to 21. And I trust that those will be made available, and therefore you can draw on those to see where I'm coming from. Leviticus 25 sets out a clear pattern. That is, that our lives are meant to have a right balance between work and rest. Indeed, Leviticus there developing the theme from 1 day in 7 to 1 year in 7, and extending rest finally that after 7 sets of 7, you have an amazing double celebration, as it were, on the 50th year, a year of resetting and blessing at the year of Jubilee. As an aside, it's interesting to know that part of the reason that the Israelites went into Babylon and into captivity was because of God's displeasure at the ways in which they did not keep the year of Jubilee. The purpose of Jubilee was in essence a single one. It was to enable the flourishing of all in society under the principles of fairness and justice. Flourishing under fairness and justice. And in that, I want to highlight two particular things for us to reflect on. The first is, as a consequence, Jubilee ought to be a year of renewal. It was for those back in the times of Leviticus, but on for us now. It was a time to look back and to take stock, and then to look forward with renewed vigour. All of us need time to be refreshed, deeply refreshed, time for rest and recovery. And I guess that has become most acute for many of us as we look back of the previous 18 months and for all the challenges that COVID-19 has brought to us. Not just the challenges, but the pressures, the heartaches, the stresses, the exhaustion. You know it as well or better than I do. And so I think our need is greater now, not simply to stop, but to become reinvigorated, to be freshly inspired and strengthened in confidence to face the future. So perhaps this year can be more of an opportunity to put a marker in the ground and say we are going to make room for these things, for this renewal and vision and restoring as we look to go forward. Jesus in the Gospels, in Luke's Gospel there, in the synagogue in Nazareth, read from the prophet Isaiah in what our Bible translates as the year of the Lord's favour. In fact, the word he's using there is the word for Jubilee, the year of the Lord's Jubilee. And he goes on to say that today it is fulfilled in their presence. In other words, Jesus is pointing to himself as the one who can meet our deepest needs, transform our lives and the lives of others, change people individually and also society. The place of Christians in all walks of life and society is needed now as never before. We need that renewal, that reinvigorating, that refreshing of our lives to be able to go out to be Jubilee people. And part of the renewal is that in giving ourselves some space, we can come to know the Lord's wisdom and strength, and perhaps in new ways. And don't we need it as we seek to navigate within our own society the powerful forces of secularism, relativism and pluralism, which so infiltrate almost every aspect of the fabric of our world today. But we can be encouraged that while these things are strong in our own day, they are not new. Lord Shaftesbury began his ragged schoolwork back in the early 19th century, and after 25 years of work, he saw real progress in 1844, as that began to form into what eventually became, as it were, the Society for Church Schools. And as that work began to progress, he became more and more concerned about the forces of secularization in his own day and the need for Bible and prayer and for Christian teaching to be in schools. And around the 1870 Universal Education Act, he was very concerned and involved in that too, because there were enormous pressures, would you believe, at that particular point in time. Many wanted religious education not to be in schools and not to be enshrined in law that they need to be there. Many of them wanted a division between church and state, as you find in America. But thankfully, Shaftesbury and a number of other Christians pressed hard, and government in that day did give, under the law, a place that the Bible and Christian faith and worship was to be taught in schools. It's still there to this day. Nevertheless, Shaftesbury knew that this was not the end of the struggle, and he later wrote in his diary, "It was inevitable, but you will date from it the greatest moral change that England has ever known." In other words, these pressures that we face are not new, and that should encourage and help us. I want to quote a rather longer piece now from William Gladstone, of a similar age, but he wrote this, but it's because it's worthy, I think, of our reflection. "Rome, the mistress of statecraft, and beyond all other nations in the political employment of religion, added without stint or scruple to her list of gods and goddesses, and consolidated her military empire by the skilful medley of all the religions of the world. Thus it continued, while the worship of the deity was but a conjecture or a contrivance. But when the rising sun of righteousness gave reality to the subjective forms of faith, and had made actual and solid truth the common inheritance of all people, then the religion of Christ became, unlike other new creeds, an objective of jealousy and of cruel persecution, because it would not consent to become a partner in this heterogeneous device, and planted itself upon truth and not in the quicksand of opinion." And he goes on, "Should the Christian faith ever become one among many co-equal pensioners of government, it will be proof that subjective religion has again lost its God-given hold upon objective reality. Or when, under the thin shelter of its name, a multitude of discordant schemes shall have been put upon a footing of essential parity, and shall together receive the bounty of the legislature, this will prove that we once more are in a transition state, that we are travelling back from the region to which gospel brought us to that in which it found us." As I said, that's a long quote, but do reflect on it. In other words, we face these challenges. They're the same challenges. They're not new. And in our world of post-truth, fake news, and all the rest of it, we are called to stand up for the uniqueness of Jesus and of his ability to make all the difference, and to be renewed in these things. And so, how you witness in schools is important, and you need real wisdom in all of that. And how we teach in the classroom and help people to do these things. What we are about is what another Christian author described as true truth. So we need to be renewed in our vision of who we are and what we're about. And therefore, related to that, the second thing I want to say is that this year can be a year of reset and restart. In that society, Jubilee meant that all debts were cancelled, wrongs forgiven, and life started anew from an equal footing. Jubilee was not limited simply to the ways in which the Israelites worshipped, but to the ways in which the whole of their life was lived, and how they cared and lived among one another. To put it another way, it was about the air they breathed. Of course, our world's different in many ways, but the principles of justice and fairness and mutual flourishing undergirding those old principles, those olden times, remain unchanged. Our schools are a microcosm of society and communities in their own right. And I guess you know that there's a community feel about the ways in which our schools operate. When I was a bishop, when I often visited schools, and when I did, on entering a school, I would take a deep breath. And I kid you not, you could smell the atmosphere. What I mean is feel it. And if it was happy, tense, affirming, joyful, you got a sense of where people were. And as you know, as Christian teachers, it's not just the collective worship, but every aspect of a school's life that matters. It's the air that's breathed. And you play a vital role in making that air life-giving and flourishing. This is equally true whether it's to the reception class with all its demands, or at the other ends, teaching, helping people to navigate some of the things we've thought about in the realms of economics and philosophy and science and all the rest of it, and everything in between. The ancient Jubilee in resetting the economy and restoring the balance was in fact levelling up and ensuring that inequalities were not allowed to continue. It stopped the poor getting poorer and the rich richer. It set limits. Again, how relevant is that to us? Hasn't COVID exposed the imbalance in resources still prevalent? In lockdown, we've seen as never before that some have had everything they need and some have had not. They've had very little. And so lobbying those in power who can make a difference is as important now as it was all those years ago. How do we make sure we've got the right resources in our schools, whether it be IT, whether it be social care, whether it be sorting out, making sure that school meals are done properly? You could put all the list in better than me. But as Jesus of Nazareth set it out, and as he did it there in that synagogue, we are to be those who proclaim good news to the poor, release to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind. And there's so much in that. In relation to schools, through education, a whole world can open up that otherwise would not be available. It expands minds and horizons. It sets people free to be more than they otherwise could or would be. It opens people's minds and eyes, or at least it can do, to the riches of our great God and the one who has created all things for us. Much, if not most, of what is taken for granted in our education systems owes its origins and its roots to Christian understandings of the world. Jubilee assumes that God has a pattern of life. To put it very simply, we work best when we follow the Maker's instructions. That's a very countercultural way in our present climate. The dominant mantra tends to be, I am the master of my own destiny. The cry and the claim and the statement, Jesus is Lord, challenges this to the core. Indeed, when Jesus said in another place, you cannot serve two masters, what he implied is that we are never the master. It's either God or the prevailing spirit mammon that we serve. In conclusion, and as I close, I just simply want to say thank you for all that you're doing. Praise the Lord for 50 years for the Association of Christian Teachers. Be encouraged. The forces we face are not new. The Lord Jesus we serve is still the same powerful Lord who overcame and will give us his riches, both to renew and restore and reinvigorate, and also to give us courage to be out there so that we can see fairness and justice in all that we do. Education is about forming and enabling people to be set free. We have the tools to proclaim the Jubilee vision, both in word and deed. May God bless you in all that you do.